So we're going to be looking at the subject of light. And, light has an amazing reputation in our culture. I don't know if there's anybody that goes, oh, I hate light. I've never heard that before. Nobody's never told me that before, if they do. But we tie light to a number of things across our culture in a variety of ways. For instance, when somebody is not terribly smart, we say they're dim-witted, don't we? Right? Or they're dull. Or maybe the lights are on, but nobody's home. That's another way that we say that, don't we? Because light is synonymous with knowledge in our culture, with enlightenment, with being able to think well. Even the word enlightenment suggests knowledge and education drives away the darkness, in a way. The great societal shift toward education and learning after Gutenberg's printing press is called the Renaissance. But immediately following the Renaissance, right, is the Enlightenment, that setting up of knowledge and wisdom. And it was a new thing that was happening because as we came out of the Middle Ages, as some people have called it, the Dark Ages, wisdom and knowledge was not something that was prioritized by everyday people. And so the Enlightenment comes. When we look just in general at how we perceive light and what we think about light, I never wanted to go down into the basement because there wasn't enough light there. Up until third grade, I shared a basement bedroom with my brother. And he's 4 years older than me, which meant that I had to go to bed before he did, and I would sit on the stairs going down to the bedroom, and I would fall asleep there because I refused to go down to my bedroom in the basement. It was dark down there. And if I was forced to go down there, well, of course, I would reach around that corner, flip on that light switch, and then I could look, right? But the whole time I was certain something was going to grab my hand. I knew it, right? This idea of darkness is a mystery, and danger resides in the darkness, and things that we don't know or trust must be in the darkness. Light, therefore, symbolizes hope and freedom for us, a rescue from certain doom. The doom is always typified by darkness, right? I'm always reminded whenever I'm having a discussion about light and dark that scene in the Lord of the Rings trilogy when Aragorn and the forces of good are walled up inside of the fortress Helm's Deep, and the orcs and the goblins are attacking. Maybe you don't get into that kind of stuff, but they're attacking and they're overwhelming the walls. But Gandalf has told Aragorn, "Be waiting for me in 3 days' time." Right? And just as the orcs and goblins are overwhelming the walls, who should appear on the slope up above them but Gandalf? And just as he appears on the ridgeline, the sun comes over the horizon, and the Rohirrim, the riders, come sweeping down the hillside at the same time as the light, and they just sweep away the darkness, the forces of darkness and evil. Isn't that a great scene? It's in the movies and songs. We see it all over our culture. But where does this dichotomy, this distinction, if you will, between light and darkness come from? Well, I would suggest to you that it wells up out of something deep within us, a response maybe to the nature of our Creator. You see, God's nature is light. Look at what the psalmist says in Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" David says in 2 Samuel 22, "For you are my lamp, O Lord, and my God lightens my darkness." By the way, lamp and light in the Hebrew is the exact same word. In John chapter 9, Jesus is healing a man born blind, you might say. His whole life, therefore, was spent in darkness. And look at what he says. And when Jesus is healing him, this is what Jesus says: "As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Now, I'm not saying that God is photons or light waves or something like that. That's not what I mean by God's nature is light. But what he is all of those things that we associate with light, all those perceptions that we have. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We need to rewind a little bit. We need to look at this creation story and figure out what all of this means for us. Look, how light and darkness are set apart in Genesis chapter 1. Now, recall what we looked at last week. It said this, beginning in verse 1, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." Now, we said last week that everything was formless and void, which is Hebrew poetry to describe chaos. That's what was happening there. There was no order, there was no organization. Formless means no organization, right? Void means nothingness. So here's this nothingness, this chaos, and then the great organizer of human history at that time didn't even exist, which is time, right? Time didn't even exist. There was no order, zero. And then there's this statement, the waters of the deep, right? It's another reference in the Hebrew way of referring to things about this chaotic lack of order, this confusion, right? The waters of the deep. And the description is that there is darkness. That's what it says on the screen, over the face of the deep. Now, listen up, all you King James proponents. You're going to like this. The King James has a better translation here. What? Who is this man preaching to us today? This is what the King James says. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. Over versus upon. What's the difference? Okay, let's get into this. They both translate the Hebrew preposition al. About 45% of the time when this preposition occurs in Scripture, and it occurs a lot because prepositions just occur a lot in the way that we write and speak, it's translated on. Okay, that's how it's normally, all is normally translated, or 45% of the time translated on. An additional 15% of the translation, or times that it's used, it's translated upon. So about 60% of the time, when the preposition all is used, it's referring to something that comes into contact with or is intrinsic to. It's on or upon something. It's intrinsic to the object of the preposition. If you know English, you know what that is. So why is that important? Because the force of the ESV, which is on the screen, which is, I think, poorly done, by the way, is that darkness is involved in all of this chaos, but it's sort of just kind of over it. Like it's a pall that hangs over the chaos. Like the chaos wouldn't be as bad if it wasn't for the darkness that's kind of palling, as a pall over it. Like an overshadowing thing. But the King James rendering of this implies the darkness is intrinsic to the chaos, to the formless void that is there before creation. So it's not just a relation to darkness. That the void doesn't have a relation to darkness the way over may imply. Darkness is involved with this chaos, intimately involved. It's upon it. It's intrinsically dark. That's what it is. Now, to be fair to the translators of the ESV, this preposition is translated over about 515 times in the Old Testament. That's about 10% of the time that it occurs. It's translated as over. In fact, it's translated as over in the very next usage of all in verse 2. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, which is the correct translation. Why? Because it fits my argument? Yes. Let's move on. No, that's not why. Because the previous word to all is hovering, right? Does anybody hover on or upon something? No, you hover over something. So context tells us that it should be over, okay? So remember what we said last week. God is hovering over and above. He is not intrinsically involved, therefore, in the chaos. He is distinct, unique, separated from the chaos. He isn't a part of it. He's always above confusion. He's intrinsically different from it. Well, what's different from darkness? You may know this already. Light. There are no other options. It's either dark or light. Well, what about semi-darkness? How did you get to semi-darkness? Well, what about dimness? How did you get to dimness? You added light. See, the two are separate, and they're always separate. So God is being displayed as separate and distinct from the darkness that is intrinsic to the chaos. Now, here's when God begins to speak. He speaks into this primordial chaos and darkness, and here's the mind blower of this whole passage. And you probably don't even realize that it's a mind blower. Nobody would know the difference. Nobody would know that there could be a difference until God speaks. Do you see what he does when he speaks? He makes himself known, because before he speaks, it's all darkness. Right? That's all you would be able to perceive is darkness. It's all confusion. It's all lack of awareness, if we want to go back to that analogy. Until God makes himself known, until that happens, there can only be ignorance. Go and think that one through in regards to free will over lunch today. When God speaks, at that very moment he speaks, the reality of a distinction is made known. Before that, there was no way to know that there was the reality of a distinction. But now that he speaks, there's a reality that suddenly we can know. This is significant. This is huge for us. God speaks. When God speaks, things then come under his word. When things come under his word, there's orderliness and light. We'll talk about order next week. Let's focus in on light today. Before he speaks, there's darkness and chaos. Nobody would ever have known something better could exist. But after he speaks, now we know. Just like talking to anybody that you know, after they tell you something about themselves, then you know. But until they tell you, it's all rumor and hearsay. So look at how Genesis says it then in verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Do you see what that act of creation does? It brings relief. Relief? Well, sure. Have you ever gone on a cave tour? Have you ever gone deep down into a cavern and then they turn off the lights on you? Oh, I hated that. Right? As soon as they turned off that light and it was pitch black, like you could do this and not know whether or not your hand was actually there, I didn't move. I was afraid to move. I might trip over something. I might bump into somebody. I might drop into that chasm. Was there a chasm? I don't remember. You see, the darkness creates an uncertainty for me. It creates an uncertainty for all of us. And so you freeze, you don't move, you don't do anything because you can doubt that you can move without hurting yourself. I might trip over a rock that I can't see. It's all danger. You see, doubt resides in the darkness. There's nothing firm, there's nothing solid, there's nothing definitive about it. And that's the very definition of doubt. You don't want to move when you're in doubt. Think about all the times when you've been in doubt in your own life. You didn't know what to decide to do. And so you don't want to move when you're in the darkness, when you're in that doubt, and then someone turns on a light. Oh my goodness, when that cavern was lit up again, I felt such relief. Like if I had been there by myself, I would have panicked. The only thing that didn't make me panic was because I had two small children with me and I knew I had to hold it together for them. There was a relaxation then of anxiety and stress. That's what relief is, a relaxation of anxiety and stress. Whew. I can see again. I know there's no chasm over there. I knew there wasn't, but man, I forgot. God said, "Let there be light," and the light brought relief as it put everything else into relief. Oh, that is the second definition of relief. You know what relief is? In terms of light, like when you put a bright Klieg light onto something, it throws everything in the room into relief, right? There's a definition and distinction between objects within the room. It brings relief. You can see shadows of me because of the lights. It brings relief. So the light put everything into relief, and it brings us relief. This is what the distinction of light brings to us. Suddenly there is certainty because the light is accentuating differences. I can tell what something is and what it is not. There's relief from anxiety and stress. I know where to place my feet and how to move next. I can know good from evil. I can apply both of those forms of relief in that one statement. And all of that comes from God revealing himself through speaking, a revelation that brings enlightenment to us. God is light, and he brings relief because God's revelation creates distinction.